Hi. Today we will be talking about how to create a simple chat application using Azure OpenAI and then Python. So this is going to be a simple application. This is just for beginners to understand how to send a prompt to LLM and then get a response back. So yeah, let's go. Let's get into the details now. So first, before going into creating the application, I would like to mention a brief introduction about what this application is about, and what is the protocol stack, and what all things we are going to do. So if you see here, like a singleton application means like it doesn't have any conversation history. So so in regular chat applications, so when you chat something, like it has a conversation history. So when you ask something like what you said in the previous message or what you said previously, it knows what it said and it responds back accordingly. But this one, since it is a simple one, so what it is you will send a prompt, you will send a message, and then it responds back to that message. That's it. It doesn't do anything beyond that. So it doesn't say what was the previous message. It doesn't have that context. So that is a singleton chat application. So what we will do is we will use a fast API. So we will create an API endpoint to call this chat service, and we will use Azure OpenAI. So that is the one we are going to use to for the LLM to communicate. And what this application will do is it takes a user prompt and through an endpoint, and then it sends to the GPT model and then gets a response back, and then it displays in the front end or in the Postman, whatever tool we are using. So for this one, like we are not building a front end, it's a simple backend application. So we are just going to use Postman to send the request and then just get the response and just show it in the Postman. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we are using Python, we are using Microsoft Azure OpenAI and then Fast API. So for building this application, we will be using Visual Studio Code. And the project structure is going to be like we will be having a configuration file, so configuration directory where we will store all the configurations. So for example, the Azure OpenAI credentials are there. So it has the API key, it has the endpoint models and the API version. So all these things we are going to store in a configuration property file, and then we are going to load that file and then use it in the application. And we will be building a chat service. So that is the core thing of this application. So what it will do is it will take the user prompt and then sends it to the LLM and then gets back the response, and then it formats the response in the way we want it and then sends back to the API endpoint, and then the endpoint again sends it to the whoever calls it. So that will be the flow, and we are going to use fast API as I mentioned earlier. So that's how we are going to build the API endpoint, and this will be the directory structure. So the Azure OpenAI chat is a folder which I created, and within that there is a source directory, and we have the app.py, and then that is the one where I'm going to define my API endpoint. And I have the config directory, that is where I have the config properties and then the config.py. So config properties have the credentials and everything, and config.py is where I load these config properties. And the service is placed where it has a core logic where it is going to connect to the LLM and get the user prompt and then get responded back. So for this application, we need all these libraries. So we need to install FastAPI, UECon, OpenAI request, Panda, NumPy, and Python. And so for starting the application, so we will be using UECon and then give the app name and then what is the function we wanted to start, and then we are starting it. So that's how we are going to start. And before checking this, I think we can go into the Visual Studio Code and I will show you the code there directly. Okay, so this is the Visual Studio Code. So here, this is the IDE which I'm using to create this application. So I have already created this application. I just don't want to create now because it will take time to show you. So I'll just show you the application what I created. So I have created a new directory which is Azure OpenAI chat. So within this directory I have the source directory, and then we have the requirements which has all the API libraries I'm using to for this application, whatever I've installed it's here. And then the readme file is the one which has all the information about this application. So .env we can ignore for now. I'm not using that. And then we have this. So we have the app.py. This is the API endpoint. So I'm using the FastAPI. So if you see the library here, this is the library I'm using. So this is the library I'm using to create the API endpoint. And this is the chat service which I've implemented for calling the LLM. So if you see here, this is the API endpoint I'm defining. So this chat is the endpoint, and this post is the method I'm using to send the request. So here I'm getting the request from the user, and then this will be in a JSON format. So within the request, there will be a prompt key. So I'm getting the prompt key, I'm getting the value of the prompt key. So whatever the user is going to input, he's not just going to enter text directly, he's going to enter the text in a JSON format. So he's going to give the key here, and then he's going to give, so we are getting the value from there. I'll show you in Postman like how this thing is working. So the user input, we are just doing a basic check to check if the prompt is empty or not empty. So if it is not empty, then what we are doing is we are invoking the service, which is the chat completion I implemented. So which will have the logic to call the LLM. So if you go to this service here, so if you see here, this is the client which I have defined for the OpenAI. So if you see here, this is the OpenAI library. I'm importing the Azure OpenAI because I'm using Azure. So I'm importing that, and then I'm importing the config parser so that I can load the config files. So this config, so what I have done is these config are present under this config directory here. So I have kept the config files here. So I have kept them config files under this config directory. So if you see here, these are the configurations I have kept. So this is for the Azure. So first is the API key, and then the endpoint, and then the model for the open which LLM you're going to use that model. So I'm using GPT mini, that model I'm using. So I have just put it here. And then the API version is nothing but the version which is for the model. So all these details you can get from the Azure portal. So when you create a resource there, so and then it will give you all these details. Once you deploy the model, OpenAI model, it will give you all these details. So you can take from the Azure portal, and then you can get these credentials there. So we configure all these configurations here, and then once we configure it, then we load these configurations through this configuration loader. So we get the API key, endpoint, model, API version, and then just assign it into a variable. So all these credentials and API key models we load into a, we have loaded, and that is what we are using here. So that configuration thing only, you are just using it here, the endpoint, key and version. So we are using that, and then we are creating a so Azure OpenAI client we are creating here. So now we are going to use this client and then call the chat completion create method. So this is the method which is used to call the LLM. So here, so we have configured that we are going to call the Azure. So we have given the API key, endpoint, version, everything we have given. And then here we are going to give the model name here. So this model is nothing but the GPT-4o mini, which model we are using. So that model we are going to give here. And then we are going to give the user prompt. So the user prompt, we are not just giving as a direct string. Instead, we are giving it like a JSON. So this JSON is like contains two things. One is the system role, another is the user role. The system role defines what the AI has to do. So we are just setting a context for the AI to say that you are a helpful assistant, so that it knows that this is the thing that it has to do. And then we are giving the user request. So whatever the user has requested, any question is asking, we are just passing that here. So the user input is where the content is the key, and the user input is the value. Whatever the user has queried, like we are just taking that input and putting it here. And we are assigning that in the role, user role. So these two are really important for getting a proper response. You can send without assigning a role. So it's going to give you a response directly. It doesn't matter. But this is a simple application, so it will work without even this also. But when you're building complex applications, then all these things are required so that it can give you a proper response. So without a proper context, it doesn't give you a response which you want. It just gives you some random response which isn't like you will have to query again and again to get the result. So I think you can use this roles and get the proper response. And once we get the response back, this response cannot be accessed. So you cannot get the response directly. So it is present inside this choices object and within the message, and the content is the what we require. So we are just taking the that core content alone, and then we are returning it back to the API endpoint which called it. So here we are preparing the JSON response. So we are not just sending the response directly. We are just creating a JSON object, and then we are assigning the key response, and in that key we are giving the value here, whatever the value which we got it from the LLM. We are returning it back to whoever is calling this API. We are just sending them. So this is the application here. Like I've shown you how the application is created. So now we will see how to execute this application. So if you go here, so the app.py is present inside the source directory. So that is why I'm entering in the source directory, and then we will use this UVCon to run this application. So this app is nothing but this is the app I'm using, so I'm just giving that here. So you can load it, and once you start the application, it's going to say that the UVCon is running on this local host and port. This is where the application can be accessed. So it is just exposing this endpoints in this URL. So now if you go to the Postman, so I have configured this endpoints already here. So if you see here, so I'm giving the HTTP 127.0.0.188,000. So this is the URL which is given here. So I'm just taking that and then using it here. And this is the chat endpoint which we have defined. So if you see here, this is the chat endpoint I have here. So you just take the URL for the endpoint what you want to call, and then I'm giving the post request. So that is the post request. I have defined it here. So you can choose the post request here. There are many methods of request. So I'm using post because we are sending a request here with a body. So in the body, you have to choose raw, and then in the JSON format, we have to choose. So this is the JSON structure. So within this JSON object, we have the key value pair. So I'm sending a prompt. This is the key, and this is the query which I wanted to ask the LLM. So I'm asking, hi, how are you? Okay. So if I just send the request now. So this is the response which I'm getting from the Azure OpenAI LLM. So here it is saying that, hello, I'm just a computer program, so I don't have feelings, but I'm here and ready to help you. How can I assist you today? So this is the response I'm getting back from the LLM. So if you see here, defining the prompt, I'm defining the object here, and then I'm giving the prompt here, and I'm reading that key here, and then taking the user input from the value. So this user input is nothing but this how are you? This is the one that is coming in the user input, and this is the one I'm passing to the LLM query, and then I'm getting the response, and then that is the response we are seeing here. So but the actual response what we are getting from the LLM is like this. It's going to have all these things. But as we saw here, we are not getting, so this is the response actually that is coming from the LLM. Whatever you see here, this is nothing but this response, what we see here. That response is what I'm printing here. So you're seeing that. But we don't want all this thing. We just want the response for the question what we asked. So for that, for accessing that, we have to get into, so you have to response dot choices. So you have to go into choices. The index is 0. There is only one response for now. And then within that, you have the message. and within that you have the content. This is where the this is where the response is actually. So this is the response what we want. So all these things we don't want. So we just want for this application actually we just are doing a simple one, right? So we don't want all these things. We just need the content alone. So for accessing that content, we are just using all this. We are accessing like this. So we are taking this response and then sending it back to the API endpoint, and then we are creating a JSON structure here. This JSON structure, we are assigning the key here, and then the response, whatever we chose from here, we're assigning it here. That is what we are seeing here. So this is the object, and this is the response what we created for the key, and this is the value what we populated here. So this is how you send the request and get the response from the LLM. Now we will see what is the singleton application means. So if you see here, for example, I'm asking like, what is the capital of Canada? Let's ask this question. So the LLM is coming with an answer that the capital of Canada is Ottawa. Okay. Now I'm saying like, suggest some places to visit in Ottawa. So it's going to get the response back. So from the LLM, it is giving all this response. It's saying that, so here are some must visit places in Ottawa. So the Parliament Hill, and then the National Gallery of Canada. So it is showing many places what and all we can visit. Now I'm going to ask, suggest some places to stay here for a weekend. So here I'm not saying which place I wanted to say. I am saying like to stay here. So what I wanted to do is like I wanted to stay in Ottawa. So that's what I wanted. So let's see if it is remembering that we were speaking about Ottawa in the previous two messages. So if you send this message to LLM, so it's going to say that sure, to provide the best suggestions, could you please specify the location you're interested in? So it's very clear that it didn't remember what we were speaking for the last two messages. So it didn't have any history about the whole context, whatever we were talking till this point. So this is the singleton chat application. So it doesn't have any context. So it just takes a request, it gives you a response. It doesn't know any conversation. But for building a chatbot, this is just not enough. So we need to build a chatbot with the conversation history so that it's easy to converse with it. Else it is like you will have to give each time what was the context we were talking about. But for just for beginning, just for building a simple application, we can just use this one. So from here we can just build on top of this like how to create a multi-turn chat application, which can be a full-fledged chat application. We just saw a walkthrough of how to create a simple chat application. It is a single turn chat, so it doesn't have complex conversations and all. It doesn't store. So this is for just for beginners. So it is like how to set up the environment in Azure and how to get the credentials and how connect to LLM and then get the response back. So once we have this basic understanding, then we can just build on top of this like many complex things like a multi-turn chat, and we can introduce RAGs and we can introduce agentics. And so we can just build on top of this slowly. So for this one, I've just started with a simple application. In the next video, like I will be talking about a multi-turn chat, and from there we can just build on slowly on the RAGs and other things. So if you like this type of content, please like and share and subscribe. And if you'd like to know anything in specific, please let me know. I can create a video on that. So I will be like putting all the resources, whatever I've shown here, like I will put in the description. You can check in the link. So you will be able to download all these things. Thank you.